Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
What if the disappearance of Amelia Earhart was always a huge cover rather than a mystery? Up? Almost a century later, a search crew says they located her missing aircraft, but the numbers don't add up. Have we been given a well-crafted untruth to almost 90 years? Throughout this video, we'll discover the odd hints that are concealed, reports, and strong factors that could have concealed the truth. Stay put, as what you're going to hear may alter everything. Amelia Earhart rose to international fame in 1928, sensation, by becoming the initial female fly across the Atlantic Ocean. The she was dubbed a pioneer in the headlines. The audiences applauded her accomplishments and referred to her as a hero. However, Amelia didn't felt heroic. "I was just baggage. Similar to a bag of potatoes," she said. Reporters. Then she was unable to even operate that specific aircraft because she had no idea how. However, the world honored her as the female Lady Lindy. Amelia and Charles Lindbergh grinned for the cameras. She gestured from the balconies and took flights between towns in borrowed aircraft since she was enmeshed in a whirlwind advertising campaign created by George Putnam, her future spouse. But in the background, she kept fighting a depressing sensation. Because none of it was fair to her, but she took advantage of the publicity. Putnam scheduled her for various lectures, received commercials for baggage featuring her face, and even released a book that she authored. Amelia had a plan, and not taking pleasure in her fame status might put a halt to those plans. Then Putnam put everything in danger. Amelia secured a contract with McCall's magazine, but with her intendendo, the transaction's proceeds wouldn't be sufficient. She required more. Likewise, with her Putnam sold her photograph to Lucky with her approval. Get rid of cigarettes. But when the McCall's magazine caught the wind, removed a significant feature because it was not expected of honorable ladies to support tobacco. Amelia desired to make use of the funds she received to sustain an expedition to the South Pole for Richard Evelyn Byrd. She had to stay firmly evident in the aviation community due to she had had enough of being a passenger. She promised herself that she would likely to be the first female to incredible feats in flight. She pledged personally she planned to do a number of solo flights. Only a few months after the press, known as Lady Lindy, she at last received just behind the controls. Additionally, after she did, and she couldn't be stopped. She flew alone across the North in August 1928. She made history by traveling to and from America on their own terms. She had no co-pilots, but only her willpower, and it was sufficient. She continued honing her abilities. While elite pilots may already, she was born to fly, you see. Then she arrived. Largest test to yet. 1929 saw Amelia join the first ever air derby for women, which was a race between Ohio and California. It, known as the Powder Puff Derby, it was Roger's will. However, even though the name might sounded adorable, but the race was anything but. 20. Ladies made it through the race. Collisions and engine failures, and even Ruth Nichols, Amelia's friend, flipped her plane on the runway when she collided with a tractor. Still, Amelia persisted, completing the heavy plane in third place separation. This was no ordinary triumph for Amelia. It served as a reminder of her. Being famous wasn't merely for show, but that she possessed the necessary skills to be considered, to be among the finest pilots living. Amelia didn't recognize her accomplishment for herself. To her, it resembled clearing runways for all ladies. Following the women's, Amelia referred to her colleague as Air Derby, female pilots, and established the 99s. This association of female pilots offered consolation and encouraged the cause of women in flying. She became the group's 1930s first president, and this was only the start of her support for women pilots. Because she could fly, the advertising campaign that she and Earhart are running, her assistance to Richard and her other contributions to aviation, she developed greater more than a famous person. She was now a living legend. Women turned to stare at her for the clothing she marketed. They wished to don her gowns and act like her. Various companies persisted in wish to work with her and her initials. AE developed into a potent emblem. Amelia remained focused in spite of status. There was only one item on her, and it was to fly, to encourage flying, encourage women to become competent pilots, and additionally encourage more women to embrace flying as methods of transportation. Thus, when she took a role as an associate editor at Cosmopolitan, she advocated for aviation's acceptance and encouraged women to pursue careers as pilots. Because to her endeavors at Transcontinental Cosmopolitan Air, she was hired by Transport to promote air women's travel in 1929. She was then employed by Ludington Airline to assist them in organizing the first regional shuttle service from New York to Washington, D.C. Aircraft firms persisted in requesting her services, and she was named by National Airways as their vice president. Her renown in the aviation sector kept expanding, and she eventually became an official in 1930. Inside the Aeronautics National Association, supporting the creation of a unique category for women's records for altitude and speed. She even aided in convincing the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale will acknowledge female records worldwide, and she was also breaking those marks. In 1931, she established a world record for altitude of Karen Autogyro, a pit that is 18,415 feet deep-odd cross between a helicopter and aircraft. She didn't even own the machine. She borrowed it from a chewing gum company. However, Amelia transformed it into a pop in Theskies. She accomplished other things as well. Throughout this time frame, her union, which might have caused her to vanish, occurred around this time as well. Amelia Earhart didn't merely question Theskies. She questioned the norms of marriage as well, when she did agree to wed George Putnam, her publicist. It wasn't out of love in 1931. It was a strategic union of convenience. Putnam was a wealthy divorced man who was fixated on Amelia's notoriety. Amelia was aware of this, so when he suggested, she gunned him down 5 times. It would not be Amelia's first time to knee a proposal. She had severed an engagement to a different man in 1928. In the end, she agreed to Putnam's suggestion, yet even when she approved, she established the guidelines for the union. There would not be customary vows or blind devotion. The morning of she gave him a letter at the wedding that seemed more like to a business agreement than a letter of affection. She cautioned in it, "He cannot ensure that it will last forever." The restriction of even a visually appealing cage. She refused to adopt his name. In fact, when reporters attempted to contact her, she only chuckled, "Mrs. Putnam." Nevertheless, George swiftly discovered that he would be referred to as Mr. Hehe. It wasn't only her in Putnam, husband. He served as her supervisor, her promoter, and the creator of several her endorsement agreements. Therefore, he was aware of how she earned a lot. Critics claim he saw dollar indicators that other people noticed a trailblazing lady seeking the future. Amelia informed her spouse that she didn't want to deal with him. Companion. However, George had no intention of losing his hold so effortlessly. He waited as a result. And this makes us question, when Amelia disappeared during her, was that the last flight around the world? Only a plane accident? Or did it exist? What else is happening behind the scenes? Something more sinister, something more purposeful. Amelia didn't want to marry, but to seize the opportunity, ever since that potato, she had been chasing Sack ride over the Atlantic. In 1932, on May 20th, Amelia took departing from Newfoundland's Harbor Grace Inner Lockheed Vega 5B with a single, engine goal. She intended to fly alone, continuously traveling to Paris across the Atlantic, similar to what Lindbergh did 5 years prior. She had no desire to become Lady Lindy. She wished to be the woman Amelia Earhart accomplished what most others couldn't. Despite the difficult circumstances, Amelia was more resilient. She took a 14-hour flight and 56 minutes in icy conditions, darkness, and malfunctions in the machinery. But due to mechanical malfunctions, she had to alter her plan, and rather than she landed on a countryside in Paris, Ireland's north. Her landing was Cecil King, and T observed. Sawyer. When a farmhand noticed her, he inquired about how far she had flown, and Amelia, full of pride, met his gaze and uttered, "From America." After saying that, she eliminated the doubtful shade that had plagued her ever since 1928. Now she was the first female pilot, traveling alone, continuously across the Atlantic, and not a sack of potatoes. That flight was worth Distinguished Flying Cross to her, the Gold Medal, and France's Legion of Honor, the National Geographic Medal Society. However, despite her trembling, writing with President Hoover's hands reading, and having dinner with the first, Lady Amelia Eleanor Roosevelt, wasn't content. She had a new goal now. In spite of this goal, her new accomplishment and resurgent notoriety, she continued to be a strong supporter of women pilots. When the Bendix Trophy race in 1934 prohibited female competitors, Earhart refused to let Mary Pickford, a movie star, fly to start the race in Cleveland. Amelia persisted in daring to be unique, even with the potential for hanging death above her head. Using a Lockheed in 19355C Vega, she was the first individual to travel alone between Hawaii and California, a route so perilous that it had already claimed a life. She was confident that she would succeed, nevertheless. However, there was an issue that she shouldn't have neglected. Thus, Purdue University created the Amelia Earhart Fund in order to aviation research and donated $50,000 to finance the acquisition of a Lockheed Amelia's Electra 10E aircraft. July Lockheed Aircraft Company constructed the aircraft, adding more fuel to its tanks as well as other large changes. Earhart gave her the moniker Aircraft the Flying Lab and was all set to go, but she required a crew. Harry Manning, an experienced captain, and navigator of the SS President Roosevelt. Manning wasn't merely a pilot. He was a specialist in Morse code, and that were important, particularly when there were issues with the radio dialogue. Interaction could be what makes a safe landing different and disappearing forever across the Pacific. But Manning's role was subject to fire from George, Amelia's husband Putnam, due to a mistake made by Manning constructed in a test flight. While that Amelia and Putnam were aware of the flight landmarks, although Manning made use of the aircraft's navigation device, which resulted in them transition into a new state. Next, Manning was put to the test by Putnam in APOR conditions on a late-night flight without Amelia. In spite of those circumstances, Manning was only 20 meters away, which was well within reasonable bounds for the time. However, oddly, Putnam pretended it was a catastrophe. Why? Why release a trustworthy navigator due to the smallest mistake? However, Putnam wasn't by itself. Paul Mance, a Hollywood stunt pilot who had founded a school for flying company, with Amelia, also thought it was also necessary to modify Manning. However, Manning was the team's sole member, who was quite proficient in Morse code. Without him, the crew's communication skills was crippled across long distances. What was intended? To be a flight for 2 people, Amelia's crew shrank to 3 members, Noonan and Manning. Additionally, on March 17th, the first world flight started in 1937. They traveled to Hawaii by plane from California when something went wrong. They possessed damage to the aircraft after a non-fatal collision. Now, there were issues with the plane's propellers, and it was brought to Luke of the U.S. Navy Pearl Harbor Field Facility for maintenance. 3 minutes after the flight resumed, days later, the plane almost arrived, separated in the middle of the run. The landing gear in front, both propellers struck the collapsed and the aircraft dragged on its abdomen. The reason of the collision is not known, but a few Luke Field eyewitness, containing a related press journalist, reported witnessing a tire blow. Amelia had the same opinion, but her business associate, Mance, and further, she was blamed by others. The aircraft, now that the lab was destroyed, it was necessary to deliver to Burbank's Lockheed, California for major repairs. Why did Mance hold Amelia responsible for the collision? Was it her fault, or did she really make the error, an effort to make her appear inconsiderate? Lockheed completed repairing the aircraft, but this time there are just two. People stayed behind to finish the journey. Noonan and Amelia were prepared to leave, but Manning made the decision to resign. Thus, this time, they lacked an expert in Morse code, and there was yet another issue. Amelia didn't comprehend the new way of communication. The plane had been installed by Lockheed. She was provided a lesson, but it wasn't sufficient, since she was too preoccupied with flying. Had Manning been there, he could have. Having grasped the new mode of communication, perhaps if he was, what followed wouldn't have occurred there. By the 29th of June, in 1937, Fred Noonan, her navigator, had more than 22,000 kilometers already, throughout Africa and South America, the Southeast Asia, and the enormous Indian Ocean. When they arrived in Lillet, New Guinea, they had 1,000 is the only remaining stretch, miles over the Pacific. The most difficult sections were at the end of the trip. This was intended to be the last Triumph lap, but it wasn't. She was expected Tulin to replenish fuel on Howland Island, and the U.S. Coast Guard was anticipating her. Thus, they dispatched Itasca, the cutter, to the island in order to assist Amelia. But there was an issue that nobody expected. The 2nd of July, Amelia had provided regular updates to the Itasca, then all of a sudden they were able to communicate issues. Itasca was unable to communicate with the frequency on which Amelia's aircraft flew, and she was unable to comprehend the system. Enough to make the necessary adjustments. She kept sending in transmission for direction, but they were unable to interact with her. Itasca then started sending Morse code. However, Amelia didn't appear to comprehend Morse sufficiently to make good use of it. Voice communications were what she requested. Itasca continued to attempt Morse, and their messages were never really connected. Additionally, at a crucial time when she was orbiting close by and needed direction to locate the island and the whole system, let her down. Although she could hear them, she failed to locate them. Then came quiet. She was very, very close. Some reports state that the Electra might have gone within 50 to 100 kilometers of the island of Howland. A formal search was started and ran through July 19th, encompassing thousands of square miles in the most costly and comprehensive mission of its era. However, it was too late. There was only the unending blue, no wreckage of the Pacific Ocean. During the times when radio amateurs then asserted that Earhart's distress calls were heard. A few, notwithstanding the belief that she was pounding out Morse code from an island that has been abandoned. But the signals were erratic, unverified, and ultimately overshadowed by falsehoods and misunderstanding. George Putnam, her spouse, started a private search as well, however found nothing. Then, in 1939, he petitioned the court to have Amelia pronounced dead, and the 7-year wait period paused to allow him to handle Earhart's money. Consequently, Earhart was formally pronounced deceased on January 5, 1939. Was there anything Putnam knew that he wasn't stating? There are those who think he may have, and other people think that the United States undoubtedly did, but a cover-up was requested by superiors because Amelia was an American spy who used the journey around the globe to assemble data for the U.S. Marshall, Island's residents asserted they observed the pair in Japanese detention, and a documentary from 2017 might have verified this. 2017. A history, a shocking revelation was made in a Channel documentary. Buried in a blurry black and white photograph, it appeared that the U.S. National Archives Earhart and Fred Noonan, her navigator, sitting on a pier in the Marshall Islands, alive, eye lands. A Japanese person is right behind them. Ship dragging what appeared to be her Electra Lockheed. Those who are accusing the United States claims this is a cover-up, said they made it through the collision and were seized, and the residents of Marshall Island were correct. The History Channel rapidly removed the documentary. Yet the harm was finished already. The notion of Earhart possibly on a covert espionage operation. For the United States remains. A few senior veterans of the armed forces have even backed up that theory. Was she, therefore, a valiant pilot misplaced at sea, or a secret operative deserted by her own nation? What had actually happened to her? By 2024, almost 90 years after the incident, the response to this eternal query was at last responded. An ex-Air Force member, a deep-sea intelligence officer, Tony Romeo, an explorer, just revealed what might be the most significant discovery in this mystery. Tony sold all of his real estate business to pay for an 11 million journey across the Pacific Ocean, because he thought he might locate what generations of rulers, adventurers, whereas conspiracy theorists were unable to. The forgotten plane of the heart. He now claims that he's, with a sophisticated underwater drone, Romeo, and deep-sea vision, his business investigated over 5,000 square kilometers of seafloor close to Howland Island. Correct? Amelia's last known location was 1937. Then it took place. They grabbed Assinar, picture which they say appeared, similar to a two-engine airplane, twin tail, and a corresponding silhouette down to the Lockheed 10E Electra specifics. The weird part comes next. It discovered more over 5,000 meters below the surface, over 100 meters off course, correct? Where no one dared to search. Romeo ice experts aren't persuaded. They assert that what he's seen was merely a rock, but Romeo is committed to disproving them. Thus, he and his group are already making plans. A follow-up mission to verify whether this actually serves as the last resting place for Earhart Amelia. What will he discover?